A question that stops you cold. What if I told you that a single building, one you could walk past on a highway, costs more to build than 20 of the world's tallest skyscrapers combined, generates billions of dollars in revenue every year, and yet most of its owners lose money on it? That's not a paradox. That's nuclear power. And today, we're going inside the economics of owning a nuclear power plant, from the jaw-dropping upfront costs that bankrupt companies before a single kilowatt is produced, to the hidden revenue streams that make governments desperate to keep these things running forever. Because the real story of nuclear power isn't about physics. It's about money. And it's one of the most fascinating financial puzzles on the planet. The price tag that breaks banks. Let's start with the number that kills most nuclear projects before they even break ground. Building a new nuclear power plant in the United States today costs somewhere between $6 billion and $12 billion per reactor. And that's a conservative estimate. The Vogtle Units 3 and 4 project in Georgia, the only nuclear plant currently completed in the U.S. in decades, came in at a staggering $35 billion, more than double its original budget of $14 billion. To put that in perspective, you could build approximately 7 Golden Gate bridges for the cost of one American nuclear plant. You could fund NASA's entire annual budget twice over. You could buy every NFL team in existence. And here's the brutal part. You haven't generated a single electron yet. Construction alone takes between 10 to 20 years in most Western countries. That means an owner is pouring billions into a project with no revenue for over a decade. Interest payments on construction loans alone can add 30 to 50% on top of the build cost. This is what experts call the debt spiral, and it has killed more nuclear projects than any safety concern ever has. So, why would anyone ever build one? The revenue machine nobody talks about. Here's where it gets interesting. Once a nuclear plant is running, the economics flip completely. A typical nuclear reactor generates around 1,000 megawatts of electricity. At average U.S. wholesale electricity prices, that translates to roughly $800 million to $1.2 billion in annual revenue per reactor. But the real magic isn't the revenue, it's the operating cost. Nuclear fuel, uranium, is extraordinarily cheap relative to the energy it produces. The fuel cost per kilowatt hour from nuclear is roughly 0.7 to 1 cent. Compare that to natural gas, which fluctuates wildly, or oil, which is subject to global political shocks. Once you've built a plant, your primary fuel cost is almost laughably low. This creates an economic moat unlike anything in the energy world. A nuclear plant that has paid off its construction debt, which typically takes 20 to 30 years, becomes an absolute cash printing machine. Plants in the U.S. that were built in the 1970s and 1980s and have since paid off their debt are now generating electricity at some of the lowest costs in the entire energy grid. This is why utility companies fight tooth and nail to extend plant lifespans. A 40-year-old reactor that's already paid for itself isn't a liability. It's a gold mine. The hidden costs that never stop. If you're thinking this sounds like a great investment, slow down. Because nuclear plants come with a cost structure that most industries simply don't have to deal with. The costs that continue long after the plant is turned off. Decommissioning a nuclear plant, safely dismantling it, cleaning up radioactive material, and restoring the site costs between $500 million and $1 billion per reactor, and takes decades to complete. U.S. law actually requires plant owners to set aside money in a decommissioning fund during the plant's operating life. As of recent estimates, U.S. nuclear operators had accumulated roughly $50 billion in these funds, and many analysts believe it's still not enough. Then there's the waste problem. Nuclear plants produce spent fuel rods that remain radioactive for thousands of years. The U.S. has no permanent repository for this waste, a political failure that has been going on since the 1980s. Owners must store this material on site in spent fuel pools and dry casks indefinitely, at significant ongoing cost. And safety staffing is non-negotiable. A typical nuclear plant employs between 500 and 800 people permanently. Engineers, security officers, radiation monitors, regulators. You cannot run a skeleton crew. This staffing requirement alone costs hundreds of millions per year in payroll and training. Before we go further, if you're finding this eye-opening, hit subscribe right now. We cover the economics of industries most people never think about every single week. You'll want to be here for what's coming next. Who actually owns these things? This might surprise you. In the United States, most nuclear plants are owned by large regulated utilities and energy companies. Names like Exelon, now Constellation Energy, Duke Energy, and Dominion Energy. Constellation alone operates the largest fleet of nuclear plants in the country, with 21 reactors across 12 stations. But the ownership model is complicated by regulation. In states with regulated electricity markets, utility companies pass their costs directly to ratepayers and earn a government-approved profit margin. Nuclear plants in these states are essentially guaranteed revenue. The public pays whether the plant is cheap or expensive to run. In deregulated states, it's a free market. Nuclear plants have to compete on price with natural gas plants and increasingly cheap solar and wind. And here's where many older plants struggle. When natural gas prices drop, nuclear plants can actually lose money on every kilowatt they sell, because their fixed operating costs are so high they can't drop their prices low enough to compete. This is why between 2013 and 2021, the United States permanently shut down 13 nuclear reactors, not because they were unsafe, but because they were economically unviable in a competitive electricity market. Governments started panicking. Nuclear power produces zero carbon emissions during operation, which is increasingly critical for climate goals. Several states introduced zero-emission credits, essentially government subsidies paid directly to nuclear plant owners to keep them alive. Illinois, New York, and New Jersey all implemented such programs, saving multiple reactors from premature closure. The economics of nuclear, it turns out, are inseparable from politics. The global picture, a tale of two worlds. Walk across to the other side of the planet, and the economics look completely different. In France, nuclear power provides roughly 70% of the country's electricity, the highest proportion in the world. France's state-owned utility EDF built its entire nuclear fleet in a standardized, industrialized process during the 1970s and 1980s, building essentially the same reactor design over and over again. This repetition dramatically slashed construction costs and times compared to countries like the US, where every plant was custom designed. The result? France has some of the lowest electricity prices in Western Europe, and its nuclear sector employs over 220,000 people directly and indirectly. South Korea tells a similar story. Korean nuclear plants are built faster and cheaper than almost anywhere else in the world, largely because of disciplined project management and standardization. South Korea has become a major nuclear exporter, winning a $20 billion contract to build plants in the UAE and competing aggressively for projects worldwide. Meanwhile, China is building nuclear plants at a pace that dwarfs the rest of the world combined. China has 22 nuclear reactors under construction right now, more than the rest of the world put together, and is doing so at costs well below Western levels, partly through government financing that eliminates commercial interest rates entirely. The economics of nuclear power aren't fixed. They're a function of policy, financing, standardization, and political will. The same technology that bankrupts a private company in Ohio becomes a national economic asset in Beijing. The new nuclear question. Here is where nuclear energy enters its most important test yet. The next generation of reactors will not look like the giant plants of the past. Small modular reactors, or SMRs, are designed to produce roughly 50 to 300 megawatts, be built in factories, and assembled on-site. The promise is simple. Standardization could cut delays, reduce overruns, and bring nuclear construction costs down to the $1 to $3 billion range. Companies like NuScale and TerraPower are betting billions that this model can revive nuclear power. Supporters say SMRs could deliver reliable, carbon-free electricity around the clock, exactly when the world needs clean baseload energy. Skeptics argue nuclear has promised cheaper construction before and failed. But the real lesson is bigger than technology. Nuclear power is about time. A plant may cost billions and take years to build, but it can produce electricity for 60 years. That makes it difficult for private markets focused on short-term profits, but attractive for governments and long-term investors. The winners will be countries that finance nuclear like a generational asset. The losers will try to build 60-year infrastructure with 5-year thinking. That is nuclear's real economic lesson. What do you think? Is nuclear power a worthwhile investment for the future, or has its moment passed? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if this kind of deep economic breakdown is what you're here for, subscribe and hit the bell, because we've got a lot more of these coming. See you in the next one. Subscribe for more economic deep dives on industries, technologies, and global trends. New videos are coming soon, so stay tuned here.